I never imagined a single knot could unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. That evening, I walked down the narrow hallway of our home, the faint hum of the air conditioner mixing with the distant tick of the wall clock. Liam's bedroom door, usually shut tight at this hour, was slightly ajar, spilling a soft glow into the dim hallway. Something about the way the light flickered made me pause, my instincts pricking with unease. I am 38, a mother juggling work, home, and a boy who is growing faster than I can keep pace with. Liam, my 12-year-old, has always been curious, headstrong, and fiercely independent. He's the kind of child whose silence carries more weight than his words, and lately, I'd sensed a quiet tension between us that I couldn't quite place. I tried to attribute it to adolescence, to the usual phases of growing up, but a gnawing intuition whispered that there was more beneath the surface. Mark, my ex-husband, left years ago, and I had buried the hurt beneath routines and polite smiles, convincing myself that Liam and I were finding our rhythm again. Our home is cozy, filled with the smell of tea and the faint scent of his laundry drifting from his room. But even in this comfort, there are fractures, small, almost imperceptible cracks in the walls of trust I assumed were solid. As I approached Liam's room, I heard a faint murmur of voices. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought he might be talking to a friend online, his headphones likely masking the volume, but the voices had a certain hesitance, a nervous energy that made my chest tighten. Something about the tone set me on edge, an unease I couldn't shake. I stood just outside the door, gripping the mug of tea in my hand, the warmth doing little to calm the tension creeping up my spine. "Liam," I whispered softly, rehearsing the words to sound casual, normal, harmless. But no response came, only the continued hum of hushed conversation inside. My curiosity battled with caution. Should I intervene, or should I trust the boy I've raised to navigate his own world? With a deep breath, I nudged the door open slightly, intending only to peek. That moment, the split second before I fully entered, was charged with a quiet dread, a sense that the ordinary night I had planned was about to fracture. The familiar rhythms of our life, the comforting rituals of bedtime, the tea, the stories, the soft goodnight. I realized none of it would feel the same after what I was about to see. And then I saw them. The figure on the other side of the room. Someone I hadn't expected to encounter here changed everything. My pulse quickened, my vision sharpened, and I knew that nothing in the world of bedtime routines and parental control could prepare me for the reality in front of me. I froze, caught between the impulse to retreat and the need to confront. One question burned through my mind, louder than any whisper. How did it come to this? I lowered my hand from the doorknob, trying to steady my racing heart. The sight before me wasn't just unexpected. It felt like a mirror held up to every failure I hadn't wanted to face. Liam sat on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched, his face pale and tense. Across from him was Rachel, an old friend from my college days, someone whose presence in our home should have been impossible. Yet here she was, her expression a mixture of guilt and apprehension, as if she, too, sensed the fragile line we were all teetering on. I sank onto the edge of Liam's bed, letting the quiet tension settle around us. I needed to understand, needed to hear the story from the voices that had been whispering behind a closed door. "Explain," I said softly, though my voice trembled despite my attempt at calm. Liam glanced at Rachel, and I could see the conflict etched across his young face. Fear of anger, fear of disappointment, fear of the consequences he didn't yet fully comprehend. I remembered the years leading up to this moment. The nights when he would cling to me after bad dreams. The mornings when he would wait silently at the breakfast table until I noticed he hadn't eaten. The subtle changes I had dismissed as growing pains. Liam has always been sensitive, perceptive beyond his age. But I had convinced myself that keeping busy, maintaining routines, and checking off parental tasks was enough. I realize now how little attention I had paid to the small signs, the quiet signals that something was stirring beneath the surface. Rachel's presence added another layer of complexity. She had been someone I trusted once, someone who had shared memories of my youth, someone I had thought of almost like family. Yet her reappearance here, in Liam's room, at this hour, made the air heavy with uncertainty. What had begun as mentorship or friendship, or so I had assumed, now carried a weight neither of them fully understood. I studied Liam's face, searching for the boy I knew, the one who had confided in me about scraped knees and first crushes, the one who laughed too loudly and argued too stubbornly. He was still there, but he seemed smaller somehow, shadowed by the secrecy that had brought us to this point. And Rachel, though she looked older, more composed than him, carried the tension of someone aware she had crossed an invisible boundary. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay grounded. The room smelled faintly of his laundry, faintly of crayons and old paper, but now it also carried the unspoken truths that had gathered there over weeks and months. This wasn't just about a secret conversation or a hidden friendship. It was about trust, boundaries, and the fragile scaffolding of our family dynamic. For the first time, I realized that nothing I had assumed about our household, about my son's life, about the people I had let close, could be taken for granted. Every routine, every bedtime ritual, every whispered "I love you" was now layered with complexity I had never anticipated. And as I looked between them, I understood the truth. Tonight would mark a turning point. Something had shifted. I could feel it, and there was no going back to the way things were. I took a slow, steadying breath, trying to silence the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though each word carried the weight of weeks, perhaps months, of unspoken doubts and anxieties. Liam's eyes dropped to his hands, twisting the edge of his blanket, while Rachel's gaze darted nervously between the two of us, as if searching for a safe place to land. "I didn't think you'd understand," Liam admitted finally, voice trembling but resolute. I just needed someone who remembered things the way I do, someone who didn't always tell me I was wrong or rush me." Her presence had been a balm in ways I hadn't considered, a bridge over loneliness and confusion, yet now it felt like an intrusion into territory I had assumed was mine alone. And yet, as I studied his anxious face, I realized that this secrecy wasn't born of malice. It was born of a desperate need for connection. My chest tightened with both relief and guilt. Relief, because he hadn't been in danger, and guilt, because I hadn't been present enough to notice his struggle until it had escalated to this point. Rachel spoke then, voice quivering. "I only wanted to help. I didn't mean for it to go this far, for you to find out this way." Her eyes were pleading, but the tension in the room made it impossible to forgive or dismiss so easily. Every word highlighted the invisible line that had been crossed, the delicate balance between guidance and interference that had been shattered. Liam's defensiveness emerged as quickly as his vulnerability. "Mom, I wasn't hiding it to be bad. I didn't know how to tell you. Everything feels different now. I needed someone to understand that." His words pierced me, cutting through my initial anger, leaving only a raw, aching awareness of the complexity of his world. I wanted to scream, to assert control, to reclaim the parent role I felt slipping away, but the room was thick with unspoken truths, the kind that couldn't be confronted with anger alone. I realized that what I needed most in this moment was to listen, truly listen, without judgment, while my instincts screamed that I should step in and fix it. Every glance, every paused sentence, every flicker of emotion between them revealed layers of trust and secrecy that had quietly accumulated. I understood then that this wasn't merely a breach of rules or a lapse in judgment. It was a reflection of all the moments I hadn't been fully present. The late nights at work, the distracted mornings, the casual "I'm fine" that had become too easy to accept. The tension in the room was palpable, and yet paradoxically it carried the seeds of understanding. A fragile truth was beginning to surface, that mistakes and secrecy, while painful, could also illuminate gaps that needed to be bridged. But bridging them wouldn't be simple, not without discomfort, reflection, and honesty. As the murmurs faded and silence settled briefly over the room, I realized the gravity of what we were facing. This was more than a conversation about boundaries. It was about trust, connection, and the fragility of relationships I had assumed were secure. And in that stillness, I knew that the revelations of tonight would demand reckoning, reshaping everything I thought I knew about my son, my friend, and myself. The weight in the room pressed down on me as I tried to steady my breath, the silence thick with tension and anticipation. Liam looked at me, eyes wide, vulnerable, searching for a reaction I wasn't sure I could give. Rachel's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white, every muscle in her body taut with guilt and apprehension. It was in that charged stillness that the truth began to unfurl, fragile and sharp, like sunlight through a cracked window. "I didn't mean to hide it," Liam said, voice quivering. I felt like no one really listened anymore. You were always so busy, and I needed someone who remembered me, the way I was before everything got complicated. His confession hit me harder than I expected. All the moments I had brushed aside, all the small signs of struggle I had ignored, coalesced into a piercing clarity. My son had been reaching for connection in ways I hadn't noticed until now. Rachel finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I only wanted to be there for him. I thought if I listened, if I understood, it could help. I never imagined you would see it this way." Her words, meant as an explanation, felt like both apology and revelation. The complexity of intention and consequence became starkly apparent. Her presence had been both a comfort and a boundary crossed, a duality I struggled to reconcile. For the first time, I saw Liam not just as my son, but as a person navigating a world I could no longer fully control. He was not simply hiding, not scheming. He was seeking understanding in the only way he knew how. And Rachel, though misguided in method, had become a catalyst for a deeper truth about our family. The gaps in attention, the silences I mistook for independence, the distance I allowed to grow unchecked. Tears pricked at my eyes as I processed the revelation. This was not a story of betrayal in the conventional sense, but of miscommunication, unmet needs, and fragile trust. The emotional intensity of the moment forced me to confront my own failings with brutal honesty. The missed bedtime talks, the distracted mornings, the quick, "I'm fine," that had become too easy to accept. I understand," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I can see now. You both," I gestured toward them, "were trying in your own ways to connect. But this crossed a line, and we need to rebuild it. Together." My words were tentative, fragile, but sincere, a bridge extending toward reconciliation, even as the room throbbed with the weight of revelation. For the first time that evening, a sense of clarity emerged from the chaos. The truth had been laid bare, raw and unfiltered. The room no longer felt like a battleground of guilt and fear. It was a space for reckoning, reflection, and perhaps the beginnings of understanding. I realized that mistakes, secrets, and missteps, while painful, also illuminate the gaps we need to address, the bridges we need to build. As I looked between them, I understood that tonight would not erase the past, but it could mark the start of a new chapter, one defined not by secrecy, but by honesty, empathy, and the courage to face truths we had long avoided. The days following that night were quiet, yet charged with subtle shifts in our household. The air no longer carried the weight of unspoken truths, but instead a tentative hope, fragile and flickering like candlelight in a dark room. Liam and I began to speak differently. Longer conversations at breakfast, shared stories during homework, small moments where he seemed willing to let me in again. The tension that had thickened the air was replaced by cautious openness, each word a step toward rebuilding trust. I realized how much I had taken for granted. I had assumed my presence alone was enough, that routines, rules, and reminders of love could substitute for genuine attention. But connection isn't built in schedules or lists. It is forged in listening, noticing, and acknowledging the small, quiet signals that someone is struggling. Liam had reached for understanding in the only way he knew how, and Rachel, misguided though her approach had been, had revealed the gaps I had ignored. Rachel eventually withdrew from our lives, not out of malice, but out of recognition that her involvement had crossed boundaries. Yet she left a lesson that lingered, that good intentions, if unchecked, can sometimes blur the lines between support and intrusion. And I, for my part, carried a renewed sense of responsibility, not just as a mother, but as a guide, a listener, a presence capable of holding both boundaries and empathy. As for Liam, the change in him was subtle but profound. He seemed lighter, more willing to share fragments of his inner world without fear. And I, in turn, learned to observe not just his actions, but the emotions behind them, the fleeting expressions, the hesitant questions, the need for reassurance. Our relationship became a dialogue, not a monologue, a space where trust could be nurtured rather than assumed. Evenings, once filled with routine, now held moments of connection that felt deliberate and intentional. I would pause at his door, sharing a smile or a quiet word before bedtime. No longer were these gestures automatic. They became conscious acts of presence, reminders to both of us that love is shown as much in attention as in words. I understood that life would never be perfect, that secrets and missteps would inevitably surface again, but the difference now lay in how we responded, with honesty, reflection, and willingness to bridge the gaps. We had faced a fracture in our world, and while the crack remains visible, it no longer threatens to break us apart. Instead, it reminds us to tread carefully, thoughtfully, and with awareness of one another's vulnerabilities. As I stand at the doorway tonight, watching Liam drift to sleep under the soft glow of his lamp, I feel a quiet gratitude for the revelation that shook us, for the courage it took to speak truths aloud, and for the delicate, enduring thread of connection we are slowly weaving. Families are rarely perfect, I realize, but they are resilient. And in that resilience there is hope. Hope that even the deepest fractures can guide us toward understanding, growth, and lasting love.